The airplane cabin was quiet, filled only with the low hum of engines and the soft snores of sleeping passengers. Mei Lin Tan sat by the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She felt as small as a paper bird being tossed across the vast Pacific Ocean. In her lap was a single suitcase, not a literal one, but the weight of her entire life packed into a few items of clothing and a precious photograph of her mother. At 26, Mei Lin had lived a life of invisible labor. In Singapore, she had scrubbed floors until her knees were raw and cooked meals she was too poor to taste herself. She was the eldest of four, and every dollar she earned flew across the city to pay for her siblings' school books and her mother's medicine. "Do your job," she whispered to herself, the words a mantra against her fear. "Don't get involved. Don't ask questions." These were the 3 rules of the International Caregiving Agency. They had promised her a salary that sounded like a fairy tale. Atlanta, Georgia, was 10,000 miles away, a place of tall trees and even taller buildings. Her client was a man named Charles Whitmore. The agency told her he was a titan of industry, a billionaire who lived in a house so big it had its own name. But they also told her he was broken. A mysterious accident had stolen the use of his legs. Mei Lin looked out at the clouds. She wasn't afraid of hard work. She was afraid of the silence. In Singapore, silence meant someone was angry. In Atlanta, she would soon learn, silence meant someone was hiding a knife behind their back. She clutched her contract, a thick stack of papers filled with total confidentiality and strict professionalism. She didn't know she was signing her name to a death warrant. When the black car pulled up to the gates of Stonehaven, Mei Lin felt her breath catch. The gates were made of heavy black iron, twisted into the shapes of vines and thorns. They didn't look like they were meant to keep people out. They looked like they were meant to keep something trapped inside. The mansion sat at the end of a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. The moss hung from the branches like gray hair. It was beautiful, but it was cold. Even the air in Atlanta felt different, heavier, filled with the scent of damp earth and old money. The head of security, a man named Marcus with a face like a stone wall, met her at the door. He didn't smile. He didn't offer to carry her suitcase. "Rule number 4, Marcus said, his voice a low growl. "You don't go into the East Wing unless he calls for you. You don't talk to the staff about his health. And you definitely don't talk to the press." Mei Lin nodded, her heart hammering. "I understand." Inside, the house was a museum of shadows. The floors were dark mahogany, polished so bright they looked like deep pools of water. There were no family photos on the walls, only expensive paintings of stormy seas and lonely mountains. Marcus led her to a large library. The walls were lined with thousands of books, their leather spines glowing in the dim light. In the center of the room, positioned near a massive fireplace that held no fire, was a man in a sleek, silver wheelchair. Charles Whitmore was 54, but his eyes looked a century old. He had a shock of silver hair and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his lap. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a king whose throne happened to have wheels. He watched Mei Lin walk toward him. He didn't speak until she was 5 feet away. "You're smaller than the last one," he said. His voice was sharp, like a shard of glass. The last one cried within 20 minutes. "Are you going to cry, Mei Lin?" Mei Lin stood her ground. She looked him directly in the eyes, something the agency had told her never to do. "I've learned fear doesn't pay bills, Mr. Whitmore. If you want a crier, you hired the wrong girl." Charles blinked. Then slowly, the corners of his mouth twitched. He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile, not yet, but it was real. And in that quiet house, a real smile was more dangerous than a scream. The first few weeks were a dance of precision. Mei Lin's life was governed by a clock. 6:20 a.m., prepare the special tea. 7 a.m., help Charles dress. 8 a.m., administer physical therapy. Charles was a difficult patient. He was brilliant and sharp-tongued, often snapping at Mei Lin when a muscle wouldn't move, or when a pain flared in his back. He expected her to be a robot, a silent machine that provided care without emotion. But Mei Lin wasn't a machine. One afternoon, while she was stretching his legs, she noticed him staring at a small, dusty piano in the corner of the room. "Do you play?" she asked softly. I did, Charles snapped, before the world decided I should sit down forever. Don't ask questions. Mei Lin. Rule number 3. I wasn't asking about the accident, she replied, not looking up. I was asking about the music. Music doesn't need legs. The room went silent. Mei Lin waited for him to yell, to fire her, to send her back to the cramped apartment in Singapore. Instead, she felt him relax. My wife played, he said, his voice losing its sharp edge. She played Chopin. Every night at 7 p.m., the house sounded alive. Now it just sounds like clocks. From that day on, the wall between them began to crumble. Charles started asking her about Singapore, about the smell of the street food, the sound of the tropical rain, and the color of the sea. In return, he told her about the empire he had built. He spoke of software and steel, of deals made in London and Tokyo. But he never spoke of his son, Evan. One evening, Marcus, the security head, stopped Mei Lin in the hallway. The shadows of the oak trees danced on his face. You should keep your distance, Tan, he warned. I am doing my job, Marcus, she replied. No, Marcus said, leaning in. You're listening. You're making him laugh. People in this house don't like it when the king starts listening to anyone but them. Caring too much is a quick way to get hurt. Mei Lin walked away, but the back of her neck prickled. She realized that Stonehaven wasn't just a house, it was a chessboard, and she was a pawn that had moved too far across the board. The silence of Stonehaven was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon by the roar of a sports car engine. Mei Lin was in the garden with Charles, helping him enjoy the rare Georgia sunshine. A tall, handsome man with hair the color of polished brass stepped out of the car. He wore a suit that cost more than Mei Lin's annual salary, but his eyes were bloodshot and restless. This was Evan Whitmore. He didn't hug his father. He didn't ask how he was feeling. He looked at Charles's legs with a mixture of pity and disgust, then turned his gaze to Mei Lin. Who is this? Evan asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. Another one from the agency? She looks temporary. Charles's grip tightened on the armrest of his wheelchair. Her name is Mei Lin, and she is the only honest person in this house, Evan, which is more than I can say for the people who share my last name. Evan's face flushed an angry red. I came to talk about the quarterly reports, Dad, and my situation. Your situation is a bottomless pit of gambling debts and bad decisions, Charles replied coldly. Mei Lin, take me inside. We're done with the sun. As Mei Lin pushed the chair past Evan, the young man stepped into her path. He leaned down, the smell of expensive cologne and stale whiskey hitting her. You think you're special? Evan whispered, so only she could hear. You're just the help. Remember your place, or I'll remind you for you. Mei Lin didn't blink. She pushed the chair forward, forcing Evan to step aside. But she felt a cold pit opening in her stomach. She saw the way Evan looked at the mansion. He didn't see a home. He saw a pile of gold, and he looked like a man who was starving. A week after Evan's visit, the atmosphere in the house changed from cold to electric. Charles became secretive. He spent hours on the phone with his lawyers, his voice hushed. He stopped eating the meals Mei Lin prepared, his mind clearly elsewhere. One night he called her into the library. The fire was roaring, but Charles looked cold. Mei Lin, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I have lived my life thinking that money was the only way to protect what I loved. But money only attracts vultures. He held out a thick envelope. I want to change my will. I've spent 20 years building a legacy for a son who only wants me dead so he can pay off a bookie in Las Vegas. I'm tired of being a bank. Mei Lin shook her head. Mr. Whitmore, I don't want to know this. Rule number 2, don't get involved. It's too late for that, Charles said, his eyes softening. You treated me like a man, Mei Lin. Not a billionaire, not a cripple, just a man. I want to ensure that the people who actually care for the world get a chance to change it. Unknown to both of them, Evan was standing behind the heavy velvet curtains of the library. He had let himself in through a side door. He heard every word. He heard his father talk about cutting him off. He heard the mention of new beneficiaries. Evan's hand gripped the curtain so hard the fabric groaned. He had $10 million in debts. If his father changed that will, Evan wouldn't just be poor. He would be dead. The people he owed money to didn't care about last names. That night, Maylin couldn't sleep. She sat in her small room, looking at the photo of her mother. She felt like she was standing on the tracks and a train was coming. She didn't know that the train was already in the house. The storm hit Atlanta with a fury that felt biblical. Thunder shook the foundations of Stonehaven, and the rain lashed against the windows like gravel. At 11 p.m., the power flickered. In the security room, Marcus watched the monitors. Suddenly, the screens went black. All of them. "System failure?" a junior guard asked. "No," Marcus said, reaching for his radio. "Someone pulled the hard bypass. Check the east wing." In his bedroom, Charles Whitmore was awake. He heard the door creak open. He thought it was Mei Lin coming to check on him. "Mei Lin, is that you?" "No, Dad, it's the temporary one." Evan stepped into the room, illuminated by a flash of lightning. He looked wild. "You're not changing that will. You're going to sign the transfer papers for the Singapore accounts right now." "Get out, Evan," Charles said, his voice iron strong, even in the dark. "I can't get out. They'll kill me. You have billions and you're going to give it to a maid? To a foundation?" Evan grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. "I'm calling security," Charles said, reaching for the button on his armrest. Evan let out a cry of pure, desperate rage. He began to push the chair. He didn't think. He just pushed. He pushed the chair out of the bedroom, into the long hallway that led to the grand staircase. The staircase Charles hadn't used in 5 years. "Sign it!" Evan screamed. "Never!" Charles whispered. Evan gave one final, violent shove. The wheelchair hit the top step. For a second, time seemed to stop. The silver wheels spun in the air. Then gravity took over. The sound of the crash was louder than the thunder. 6 minutes later, the cameras clicked back on. Marcus found Charles Whitmore at the bottom of the stairs, his silver hair stained red. He was dead. And Evan was standing at the top of the stairs, his hands shaking, his eyes wide with a horror he couldn't take back. Maylin was woken up by screams. She ran into the hallway and saw the lights of the security team. She saw the broken wheelchair. She saw the man she had come to care for lying still on the cold mahogany floor. "No!" she shrieked, falling to her knees. She tried to reach for him, but Marcus grabbed her. "Don't touch him, Tan. It's a crime scene." Within an hour, the house was filled with police. Blue and red lights reflected off the rain-streaked windows. Evan was sitting on a sofa, a blanket over his shoulders, sobbing into his hands. He looked like a grieving son. "She was with him," Evan told the detectives, pointing a shaking finger at Maylin. "I saw her leaving his room right before the power went out. They were arguing. She wanted money. She told me she was tired of waiting for him to die." The detectives looked at Maylin. She was wearing her pajamas. She was a foreigner. She was poor. She had no one to speak for her. "I was in my room," Maylin cried. "I was sleeping." "The cameras were off, Miss Tan," Detective Rachel Monroe said. Monroe was a woman with sharp eyes and a weary face. "And Mr. Whitmore was found at the staircase. Why would a man who can't walk be at the stairs unless someone put him there?" "He never went near the stairs," Maylin said. "He was afraid of them." "Take her in," Monroe ordered. As Maylin was led out of the mansion in handcuffs, she saw Evan look up from his blanket. The tears were gone. In their place was a look of cold, triumphant malice. He had committed the perfect crime. He had killed his father and found a scapegoat all in one night. Detective Rachel Monroe sat in the interrogation room, watching Maylin through the one-way glass. "She doesn't look like a killer," Monroe's partner said. "She looks like a girl who just lost her best friend." "Looks don't matter," Monroe replied. "But the wheelchair does. Why the stairs? If you're going to kill a billionaire in a wheelchair, you do it in his sleep. You don't drag him to the stairs. It's too messy." Monroe went back to Stonehaven. She didn't talk to Evan. She talked to the house. She looked at the security logs. She noticed the 6-minute gap. She also noticed that the bypass was done from the main server room, a room that required a fingerprint. "Whose prints are on the server door?" she asked Marcus. "Only mine and the Whitmores," Marcus said. "It's high security." Monroe then visited Charles Whitmore's lawyer. She found out about the meeting that had happened 24 hours before the death. "He was changing the will," the lawyer confirmed. "He was leaving 90% of his estate to the Tan Family Foundation for caregiver rights. He was leaving Evan a small monthly allowance and a house in Florida. He said Evan needed to learn the value of $1. Did Evan know? He wasn't supposed to, but at Stonehaven, the walls have ears. Motive was forming, but Monroe needed proof. She needed to know what happened in those 6 minutes of darkness. Maylin sat in her cell, staring at the gray walls. She thought about Singapore. She thought about her mother. She felt like she had failed everyone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Suddenly, the cell door opened. It was Detective Monroe. "We found something, Maylin, but I need you to be honest with me. Did Charles ever mention a hidden eyes system?" Maylin frowned. "He once said he didn't trust the main security. He said he was a tech genius for a reason. He called it his little brother project." Monroe's eyes lit up. She went back to the mansion and searched Charles's bedroom. Not the walls, the wheelchair. She took the chair to the forensics lab. Hidden inside the frame of the silver chair, disguised as a bolt, was a tiny independent camera with its own battery and storage. Charles Whitmore hadn't just watched his empire. He had watched his own safety. When they played the footage, the room went silent. The video was shaky, but clear. It showed Evan grabbing the handles of the chair. It showed the argument. It showed the terror on Charles's face. And it showed the final, murderous shove. "Got him," Monroe whispered. But as she reached for her handcuffs, she saw something else on the video. Right before the chair went down, Charles Whitmore had looked directly into the hidden camera. He didn't look afraid anymore. He looked peaceful, like he knew that even in death, he was going to win. The arrest of Evan Whitmore happened at the funeral. He was standing over his father's casket, surrounded by Atlanta's elite. He was giving a speech about family values and tragic accidents. Detective Monroe walked up the aisle. She didn't wait for him to finish. "Evan Whitmore, you are under arrest for the murder of Charles Whitmore." The gasp from the crowd was like a wave crashing. Evan tried to laugh it off. "This is ridiculous. The maid did it. She's in jail." "The maid is free, Evan," Monroe said, holding up a tablet. "And you're on a very special video. Your father was a lot smarter than you gave him credit for." As the police led Evan away, he began to scream. He screamed about the money. He screamed about the debts. He looked like the monster he had become. The media, which had spent a week attacking Maylin, suddenly changed their tune. "Heroic Maid exposes billionaire son's greed," the headline shouted. "The truth behind Stonehaven." Maylin was released that afternoon. The sun was shining, but for her, the world felt gray. She didn't want the fame. She didn't want the headlines. She just wanted the man who had smiled at her in the library to be alive. Maylin returned to Stonehaven one last time to collect her things. The house felt different. The shadows were gone. It was just a big empty building. The lawyer met her at the door. "Miss Tan, the will has been executed. As the primary beneficiary of the Tan Family Foundation, you have control over $400 million. Maylin looked at the check. It was more money than her entire family would earn in 1,000 years. She thought about the piano. She thought about the books. "I don't want it," she said. The lawyer blinked. "Excuse me?" "Mr. Whitmore didn't give me this because he wanted me to be rich," Maylin said, her voice steady. "He gave it to me because he wanted the world to be better. He wanted care for the people who were invisible." She signed the papers, transferring every cent to the foundation. She kept only enough for a plane ticket back to Singapore and a small gift for her mother. As she walked out of the iron gates for the last time, Marcus was standing by his car. He looked at her, and for the first time he tipped his cap. "You did a good job, Maylin," he said. "I did more than that, Marcus," she replied. "I got involved." The flight back to Singapore felt different than the flight to Atlanta. Maylin wasn't a paper bird anymore. She was an eagle. When she arrived at her mother's apartment, she didn't say a word. She just hugged her. She told her about the trees in Georgia and the silver hair of a man who loved music. She started working again, but not as a maid. She became the head of the foundation's Singapore branch. She built clinics for elderly workers. She created schools for the children of caregivers. She made sure that no one who did the job would ever feel invisible again. Every year on the anniversary of Charles's death, she would go to the sea. She would play a recording of Chopin on her phone and watch the waves. She knew that Charles would be proud. Love had entered the room at Stonehaven, and though greed had tried to kill it, love was the only thing that survived the storm. Years later, Stonehaven was turned into a museum and a school for music. The grand staircase was removed and replaced with a beautiful, sloping ramp made of glass and light. In the center of the library, the old piano was tuned and polished. Every night at 7 p.m., a student would sit down and play. The house no longer sounded like clocks. It sounded like life. People still tell the story of the Singaporean maid who came to care for a man who couldn't walk. They talk about the murder and the trial. But the children at the school know the real story. They know that the greatest strength doesn't come from a bank account or a last name. It comes from the courage to see a human being when everyone else sees a burden. Evan Whitmore stayed in a cell for 30 years, surrounded by walls he couldn't push down. But Maid Tan lived a life without walls. Because when you care too much, the world becomes your home. And some rules Maid learned are meant to be broken.